Hey, welcome back, Faithful Politics listeners and watchers. If you are watching us on our YouTube channel, I am your political host, Will Wright, and I'm joined by your faithful conservative host, Pastor Josh Burtram. How's it going, Josh?
Doing great. Thanks, Will.
And today we are just so glad to have with us Mike Ter Maat. He is the Libertarian Party's nominee for vice president in the 2024 upcoming presidential election, running alongside Chase Oliver, who we had the privilege to speak with just a few weeks ago. So Ter Maat, he brings a diverse background to the ticket, having worked as an economist, police officer, educator, and has extensive experience in both the public and private sectors, which informs his libertarian views and policy proposals that we're going to be asking him about today. So welcome to the show, Mike.
Thank you very much, Will. It's a great joy to be with you. Hey, Josh, it's good to be with you guys. Thanks for the invitation. Thanks for having Chase on the other day. He's obviously a very interesting young man. I am not the charm and good looks half of our ticket here, but I'm grateful to be joining you today.
Don't sell yourself short.
Well, I guess maybe we can, just start first by having you, kind of sell us on who Mike is. Give us your elevator pitch of why the Chase Mike ticket is the ticket we should all be voting for in November.
Well, those may be two different things. It's not personal, it's not because Mike is such a great guy. And even though Chase is, it's not really because Chase is such a great guy. The truth of the matter is that the Libertarian Party and the Libertarian philosophy represents a set of principles, political positions that better align with Americans and with Americans' values than the other parties do. I grew up a Republican, fiscally conservative. I joined that party several 100,000 years ago, believing that it would stand up for free markets and free trade and a pro-growth, relatively deregulated economic environment. And you have to say, if you believe in those things, you and the Republican Party have gone in two different directions. I worked for the George Herbert Walker Bush administration many, many years ago. He was the one who had famously said, when they come looking for more taxes, I'll say, read my lips, no new taxes, right? And then felt for political reasons he had to go back on that pledge. That was a tough moment for a young fiscally conservative economist, right? And I think that was sort of the beginning of the end between me and Republicans. And I would say the same thing about Democrats. Most of my family are Democrats. They joined the party believing that the Democratic Party would remain adherent to the idea of peace over military interventionism, that it would stand up for your civil rights, that it would be relatively absolutist when it comes to free speech and stand against government censorship. And I think that you would also say that with regard to a real sense of social liberalism, the Democratic Party has been there in the past in a way that it's not today. I think a lot of Americans have a feeling that if you don't walk and talk the way the Democratic Party tells you to, it's pretty easy to get yourself ostracized these days. And so I think a lot of people who join the Democratic Party for these reasons in good faith also feel like they and their party have gone in two different directions. And I believe that the Libertarian Party continues to represent what I would characterize as, tried and true American values, and does so in a way that the other parties no longer.
Yeah, that's super fascinating. I voted Libertarian in the previous presidential election, and likely will do so again. I'm still kind of working through everything and what I'm going to do this November in terms of my vote, whether it's going to be writing someone in, whether it's going to be voting third party. I don't really feel like I can vote for Republican or Democrat in this upcoming election. So I'm kind of just working through that. But I would love for you to kind of even go into more depth on the core principles of libertarianism and how they shape your and Chase's political vision for America? Like, in essence, how are these core principles of libertarianism going to be fleshed out in a libertarian presidency?
Sure. Well, first of all, I think the most people understand that libertarianism is all about the idea that you should be living your life by your own standards and not in a fashion that's completely subjugated to the government, that you should not be relying on the government to make decisions for you in your life, either on a personal level or an economic level. That's really what it's all about, that we don't expect much from the government. All we really ask of our federal government, for example, is to try to keep us safe. I don't believe it's done a very good job of that, by the way. Try not to spend any more of our money than is absolutely necessary to do that. And to protect our civil rights, to protect our civil liberties. It's the one thing I wish the federal government were more muscular in doing than it is. In every other sense, I think the federal government is involved in things that it just doesn't need to be involved with. That either states can pick up what it is the federal government is currently doing, or nobody. It's not clear at all that the federal government is doing things that anybody in the government needs to do. These are largely decisions that should be left up to either local governments or families or individuals. So the basic idea is, let me break it up into a couple of different categories. In terms of foreign policy, we believe very, very earnestly that our foreign policy is both unethical, it does not align with Americans' sense of ethics, to take money away from Americans and use it to project military power around the world, and to do so for the sake of maintaining military hegemony. It's not an ethical proposition, in my view, to take money from a family that is not in a position of great wealth, who can't afford it, to take it away from them forcibly, by the way. This is not on a voluntary basis, and use that for foreign aid, to send it to another government, to use it to fund a military base in another country, to provide defense for another country that should be, could be, probably would be providing its own defense, were it not the case that we were doing it for them. And to do this on the basis of us making decisions for other governments, in effect, I just don't think that's an ethical proposition. And the other thing I think that needs to be said about foreign policy is that our foreign policy doesn't work. It's just not true that what the U.S. federal government does makes us safer. It's not true that what our military interventions have achieved are in the long-term strategic interests of American citizens. If you were to ask, some random American citizen in the Walmart one day in aisle 11, go ahead and name me all the military interventions that you think have been a good idea. Sure, it may have cost us billions of dollars. Sure, it may have cost us thousands of lives, but it was a good idea anyway. Go ahead, give me that list, right? It's just, as a practical, ethics aside, as a practical matter, it just doesn't work. Projecting military power around the world and trying to suppress other governments' ability to make decisions, as it turns out, just doesn't make us safer. And I would say the same thing in various frameworks with regard to our economic policy. I don't think it's going out too far on a limb to say that the fiscal policy that has been pursued by the U.S. federal government has been a good idea. We have accumulated enormous amounts of debt that now threatens to topple, literally drive into financial collapse, the federal government of the United States. Most economists don't believe that on the path that we are today, the federal government will financially survive to the middle of this century. Never mind the ethics of it, right? Just as a practical matter, it's not going to work. And I say this not because we all have crystal balls. It's because, You can do the math. You can do the simple arithmetic. It's just not going to work. We have over $100,000 in debt owed by the federal government. $100,000 in debt for every man, woman, and child in the United States. And there are politicians who would, if not explicitly tell you, certainly imply that that's something you don't need to worry about. This is money that will be paid one way or another. That is, it may feel like it's only bits, ergs, and decibels, that it's only electronic, that it's only on paper, that it's only an accounting entry. But this debt represents real resources that Americans are going to have to pay. This is a problem.
On the topic of, providing money or giving money to other countries, I kind of want to just circle back to that for a second. I mean, don't get me wrong. I'm not some sort of like national security hawk by any stretch of the imagination, but I do, and I can appreciate the value of having allies like around the globe. I mean, we're so interconnected, and you can say what you will about giving money to Israel or giving money to Ukraine, and kind of feel good about, okay, we're helping these countries do whatever it is, achieve whatever sort of goals and objectives they're trying to do. But like, how would you kind of balance, providing, or how would you balance strengthening our relationships with our allies and, keeping a lot of the money within the U.S. for?
I would not give away $1. I would not give away $1. I don't think there is a balancing act here. And I think history is on my side. I think that empirically speaking, just look at the data. It is just not true that giving money to governments buys you influence. And I would point out, in the Middle East, you mentioned Israel, and I'm an Israel lover in the sense that I've traveled Israel north, south, east, west. I've sent my daughter to events there. My son is trained in Jordan. We've traveled the Palestinian territory and surrounding Middle Eastern nations. But you have to admit that it's fairly clear. The White House has said so, that they don't have influence over the Israeli government. This is a White House that I think in its own interest should probably trying to make the case, if we hang in there with the Israelis, we'll have some influence, right? But you can't even make that argument anymore. They don't have any influence whatsoever. And that's notwithstanding billions per year, not millions per year, significant amounts of money. It's also worth mentioning that collectively, we have spent billions per year on, and this is a weird list, the governments of Jordan, Lebanon, and Egypt, the Palestinian Authority, Hezbollah, and Hamas. The last two not recently. Well, I actually don't know that with certainty. These are not organizations over which we have influence. They have not developed in a way that has advanced American strategic interests. Is Israel an ally? Certainly. But I think it causes you to ask, what is an ally? What is it that we are trying to achieve together that, toward which we are both working? Because if the answer is nothing but Israeli, then that's not an ally, that's a client. And I think that that's worth the mental exercise. It's not obvious to me that relationship is the way that I would personally structure it if I were looking out for American long-term strategic interests in the Middle East. I think that we have neglected relationships with all of the other partners. I don't think too many people would accuse the Trump administration of, being horrifically intelligent when it comes to international affairs. But you have to admit, the Abraham Accords, they got right. Reaching out and developing relationships to tighten them with the United States, but also to develop them in the context of bilateral relationships with Israel. That's moving in the right direction. I do believe that we have disregarded, disregarded might be a little heavy-handed, we have neglected to foster the kind of relationships in the Middle East that we should have been up until now.
So, Mike, that's I really love a couple things. One, I love your passion. It's really evident. It's so cool. You're the most likable vice president I've seen in quite some time, vice presidential candidate. So I'll just give that to you for whatever that's worth. But I would love to ask you to go even a little bit more in depth in the role of government in like the lives of American citizens. So I hear a lot of different ideas of libertarian. People throw that around, and it goes from anarchist to some like limited help to like there's a wide range. And I would love for you to help me understand what is the ideal role of government in the personal lives of American citizens.
That is an interesting question. It's not always the best way to look at things in the middle of a political campaign, and let me describe what I mean by that. The object of the game is to move toward less government in our lives. We have so far to go from where we are now that it is almost comical to talk about the way that it should be. And we do, and I'm happy to, and we do spend time talking about the way that it should be. But it is hard to imagine a world in which things really are optimized in terms of how little the government would be affecting our lives. Let me give you just one example, the war on drugs. We know as a practical matter that the war on drugs doesn't work. Having served as a police officer for 11 years on the road in South Florida, I know, I think most police officers know that the criminalization of drugs has not made people safer, has not kept people from becoming addicted, has not prevented overdoses. In fact, I would argue most of the overdoses come from the results of the characteristics of having a black market, right? Not having trusted providers, not having testing, labeling, all of the things that go into a regular market when you buy regular, drugs that are legal, when you buy food at your grocery store, you know what you're getting because the providers compete to provide you all of this information and develop, brand trustworthiness, all of which you don't have in a drug market when it's criminalized. Well, the American public is just now getting comfortable with the idea of decriminalizing marijuana. This is still not completed nationwide in every state. The next step will be to decriminalize other drugs that are not addictive. For some Americans, that's very difficult to get comfortable with, right? Because it's hard to imagine. It's hard to imagine. The step after that will be to decriminalize drugs that are addictive, that are quite dangerous. And many Americans have a problem with that, not on ethical grounds so much as worried about, well, what'll happen? Will people use the drugs more? For people who have spent a career in this space, you're fairly confident that you're not going to see a bump up in the extent to which people use drugs just because it's decriminalized. The issue is, will you be able to better treat it? Will you be better able to get people into the medical treatment arena if it were decriminalized? That answer has to be unequivocally yes. There's not much counter argument to that. So the real issue is, what's the best way to handle what is a huge problem in the United States, right? Drug use. It's a huge problem any way you look at, medically, ethically, in terms of how it undermines people's lives, especially young people, how it leads to deaths. But we also have another problem, which is all the crime that goes with it because it's criminalized. If you criminalize something that people are going to do anyway, you're inviting criminal activity into it in a big way and in a way that makes a lot of money. This is just one example that answers your question, which is, in a perfect world, if you were to design the system from the bottom up, you would not criminalize these things. It doesn't work. It doesn't help. It's not ethical and it's not practical. But how do you get there from here is going to take some steps. It's going to take some time. It's going to take a matter of the public getting used to these ideas. And I would argue that the same is true in almost any arena you look at. Let's look at primary and secondary education. If you were to design a system from the ground up, you would not say, well, let me collect all this money from the community, and then I'm going to decide which school you're allowed to go to. It's only going to be one school because I'm the government and I'm in charge. I'm not going to give you a choice. You would not do that. You just wouldn't. There's no economic reason for that. There's no industrial organization reason to do. There's no ethical reason to do. There's just no educational reason to do that. There's no logical reason to behave this way. You wouldn't behave that way if you were designing a system to pick up your garbage. You wouldn't say, well, this has to be done by city employees or else we just can't do it. We can't contract a company to pick up garbage. That would be a problem for us. Really? That would be a problem for you. There's no economic reason. There's no logical reason. This is not the way you would design a system. But because people have grown so accustomed to public schools, right? It's hard for some people to imagine that money would be made available to choose whatever school that you wanted to go to. And of course, the teacher unions and some families have made the case erroneously that because money would in effect be taken away from the public school system, that would somehow be detrimental to the school system. Of course, the irony is that this is an argument made by people who are just bad at primary school arithmetic. If you were to take away, say, 80% of the dollars per pupil for every kid that left the school system, the amount of money left in the system per pupil would increase, not decrease. And so you see that this is a situation where optimized, you would absolutely allow families to pick whatever school you want to pick. As a matter of fact, if it were optimized, you probably wouldn't even decide that the community should be collecting money for it. But it's hard to imagine because we've grown so accustomed to the system we have. It's hard to imagine how to get there from here. And so it's really a matter of allowing people to think through these issues over a matter of time. Same thing with police reform. There's a lot of things that we need to do to change police culture, how we hold police accountable, how we compensate police officers. But like any culture, police culture is going to take some serious time to change.
Yeah, I want to get back to criminal justice here in a minute, but I just want to maybe carry on the conversation about education for a moment, because that's something that's definitely in the news. Biden has tried and succeeded in some regards of getting rid of student debt for those that attended college. He's yet to hit my student loans yet, so I'm a little bummed about that. But like, what would you do to kind of help with the cost of higher education and even more broadly, just post education after high school, like for trade schools or whatnot?
Right. The first thing is to point out that even the conversation that we have is adulterated, is skewed by our experience. Lots of things in our economy are expensive, right? Cars, Cars are, housing is expensive. Food is expensive. Lots of things are expensive, right? How do we drive the cost down in those areas? By keeping the government out of it. We know this from experience. I'm not suggesting, I'm a political savant or I'm the world's greatest economist. This is just experience over the past 100 years. We know that if you want costs to be driven down, you need to foster competition and keep the government out of it. That's just reality. That's not Mike wishes that's the way it were. That just is how it works. That if you subsidize something, you will drive up the cost of it. You'll drive down the price, but you'll drive up the cost. If you pick winners and losers, you'll undermine competition, and that will drive up the cost. So we know how these things work. We just sort of refuse to acknowledge reality. It was interesting, your choice of words, which I'm not picking on you. I mean, it is the typical choice of words when we say Joe Biden got rid of debt for a bunch of people. Well, the truth is he didn't get rid of the debt. He just made someone else pay for it. That's the reality. But we don't like to say that, right? It doesn't sound as nice, right? To say, well, he decided someone else was going to pay for these students' debt. It sounds nasty.
Don't say that, Mike.
What's that? And so I think that we need to get back to...
Don't say that someone else had to pay for it. It was just gone. He waved his magic wand and it's not there anymore.
Well, it's not there on paper, and that's because the costs were transferred to somebody else. But whoever loaned, right, whoever lent that money in the first place needs to be paid back by somebody. We're not talking about driving these institutions out of business, I hope. Now, in the case of government guaranteed debt, the government will pay off the financial institution and then taxpayers will pay for it. Government direct loans, taxpayers will pay for it. But there's no such thing as getting those resources back. Education does cost money. There are real resources involved when someone receives an education. Someone's got to pay the teacher and turn the lights on, right? All of that is actually, that's real. That's not just bits and ergs and paper and accounting. That's real. Those are real costs that have to be borne by somebody. And delaying it or shifting it to someone else doesn't make it any cheaper. Now, interesting, your next question, how do we make education cheaper? It is true. You need to get the federal government out of it and foster a competitive environment. It is no coincidence that the primary school education system and the secondary education system in the United States are arguably the systems, the industries with which Americans are most frustrated, right? Along with criminal justice. These are the industries, I think they would come to the top of the list if you were to survey Americans, which industries piss you off the most, right? I think that those would be two pretty competitive entries on that list. And it is also no coincidence that our higher education system is the envy of the world. People are dying to come to the United States for a college education. Well, what's the big difference? Well, the big difference is that the government runs the primary and secondary school system and has a relatively hands-off approach to higher education. Not so much anymore, right? The government continues to intrude on higher education, driving up the cost. The cost of education increases naturally because it's a difficult thing to economize. Lately, we've been able to economize providing higher education because a lot of it is done online. That'll keep the cost down. But up until 15 years ago, college education costs continue to rise because, turning the lights on and real estate and paying these faculty members is just one of those things that's expensive and became more and more expensive relative to other things in the economy because technology was not helping out that industry. Now it is. Now technology is helping out that industry, and costs will come down to the extent to which people can avail themselves of an education online. The answer is to keep the government out of it. If you keep the government out of it, people will innovate. And you see that. We see innovation for higher education. Have you looked at a community college program lately? Wow. I had the opportunity to look at our local community colleges catalog just a few days ago. I was really impressed that there's a whole range of classes in there. I don't even know what all of them are about. I can read the titles, the various technologies that they're teaching that create a pipeline right into a career that help you get to work right away. Not the kind of programs that require 4 years of education and then an advanced degree. So I was really impressed by that. But the answer is that you need to allow these organizations to innovate.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I'm very, very sympathetic to that idea of the market forces essentially doing what they're designed to do through competition, through innovation, through the advancement of technology and scaling things down and making things more affordable. You think about people can get online. They don't have to go to brick and mortar. They don't have to do the same kind of things before that they had to do. And of course, an entire infrastructure and system was built up around that, which then constrains, and then you have to deal with the material interests of a lot of different people, the people that build the buildings, and they want them rented, and all the different things that, people want. But the core idea of, hey, you have a person that wants to get educated, so you need them to be able to get educated. They need the information delivered to them in a way that they can actually absorb it and do something. I think that's really great. So I love the idea of getting the government out of higher education or minimally involved in education really at all, because I think it opens it up to so many kinds of basically ideologies on both sides that then come into and are forced upon people that don't have an option. But I would love to move this, even kind of thinking about this government intervention in people's lives and when the government forces certain things. Criminal justice reform. Being a previous and having experience rather as a police officer, what did you see that was wrong with the criminal justice system? How does it need reformed? Because that's probably one of those things, right, that most interacts in some way of the top, major categories of government intervention. Criminal justice is up there, right, and then especially its implications and consequences on the populace when the government comes in and forces you to go to jail or forces you to pay a fine or forces you to do any number of things that it will coerce you to do. What is your view? What is the libertarian view? What is your view on the criminal justice system and its purpose, and how does it need to change from where it is right now?
Sure, I appreciate that. And of course, the big intervention in our lives comes from the tax code. But setting that aside, in the enormous proportion of our resources that the government takes away from us, you're absolutely right. The criminal justice system in the United States, I would argue, is the most oppressive of any in the world. Our rate of incarceration blows away whoever the hell is in second place, right? And the reason for this is the war on drugs, which as a practical matter, as we've already discussed, just doesn't work. And I think that there is a big problem with it ethically as well. The reason the war on drugs is so important is not merely because it's such a failure, but because it destroys so many lives. When you see the neighborhoods, the families, and the individuals that are directly affected by our sky-high rates of incarceration. It breaks your heart. I used to say to my trainees, if you were not a professional economist before becoming a police officer, becoming a cop will turn you into an economist because you see the effects of bad public policy up close and personal. You see what happens to neighborhoods when you have sky-high rates of incarceration, bad public schools with no private school option, right? Bad housing policy, bad zoning policy, right? It's very difficult for neighborhoods in a healthy sense to survive that cocktail of bad public policy. This idea that is truly American, this intergenerational, persistent poverty, is something that comes from bad public policy. This is not something that would be predicted by free markets. This would not be predicted by a hands-off relationship between us and government. The local destruction of neighborhoods is the result of bad public policy. That is something that most Americans don't want to hear, right? And I think that we don't want to hear that because, first of all, we don't want it to be true. It's hard to believe. I mean, after all, we've had thousands and thousands of well-meaning bureaucrats and politicians and public servants, civil servants of every stripe trying to do right by people in the United States. Smart people, hardworking people, patriotic people, right? And yet our system not only doesn't work, but is counterproductive. This is a hard thing to turn. That is a very large ship that you're trying to turn around in a very narrow channel. That is going to take some time because I do believe that our acceptance of the way government behaves on a local level is a cultural phenomenon. This is not just a matter of public policy. This is not similar to, should our top income tax rate be 32% or should it be 34%? It's not quite like that. This is more fundamental. It's more cultural. It's how we view ourselves on an ethical level, our relationship between government and individuals. The same thing with the tax code. We seem to have accepted over the past 100 years the idea that we need a direct relationship between us and the federal government in terms of our finances. Now, if you were to think about that, if you were to go back 200 years and I were to describe the situation in the year 2024, you would say that's pretty weird. And you would have a deep, profound problem with it. But we've grown accustomed to it. In my own view, this is part of the reason why the government spends so much money, because they don't get enough pushback, right? Anyone in your audience who's ever been audited, as I have been, as I'm guessing you guys have, I'm looking at you two, I would absolutely audit you two if I were in charge of deciding who should be audited. Couple of goofballs, right? The three of us, I would absolutely audit all three of us. I would audit everybody if I had the resources, right? And you were a good bureaucrat, and you believed in government, and you thought that everyone was untrustworthy. I mean, that's the basic nexus of the relationship between us and government, is government doesn't trust you. Anyone in your audience who's ever been audited knows that's a lopsided relationship. That's a weird relationship. There is no standing up to the federal government. I believe that the right way this should be handled is for the federal government to be required to go to state legislatures for money, not directly to individuals. That it is up to our states to stand up for us. I'm not sure the Commonwealth of Virginia would do a perfect job of representing our interests, right? It's no silver bullet. State governments do some pretty weird things too. But I think we'd have a better shot at Richmond standing up to Washington than we would the three of us standing up against Washington. You get my point. And I think that this is part of the reason why the federal government just rolls from one year to the next with the tax revenue that it does.
Yeah. So Mike, my question to, and this would be my last question, and because we're getting pretty close to time, I just want to make sure that we have enough time
we
to
got
give
interrupted.
you
We got minutes.
tell us how people can get a hold of you. But so I asked this question to Chase when we had him on, and I wanted to ask you a similar question. So what's one good quality and one bad quality that you have, or you feel your fellow running mates in the other political parties possess? So that would be Tim Walz on the Democrat side, and then J.D. Vance on the Republican side.
That's a very interesting question. I think the big difference between us as libertarians and the other candidates, whether Republican or Democrat, is that libertarians more trust the judgment and instincts of American citizens. We are less interested in running your lives. We are less interested in making decisions for you. When Republicans and Democrats are at their best, they are arguing for less government. That has become few and far between. But when they are at their best, they recognize that Americans are well positioned to make the best decisions for their families and for themselves and for their communities, by the way, which is why we believe so much in decentralizing government authority and responsibility. But what I worry about regarding the Democratic ticket and the Republican ticket is this growing sense of authoritarianism, because each of those parties has left behind their prior political agenda. Each one has adopted in its place as its number one priority keeping the other side out of power, right? The number one political objective of the Republican Party is to keep Democrats out of power, and vice versa for the Democrats. This is where authoritarianism comes from. We know this empirically by looking around the world at other democracies. It comes from a politician saying, what you really have to fear is not the loss of your civil liberties. What you really have to fear is that other idiot coming to power, and I'm here to save you, right? It comes from leveraging fear. That's what bothers me regarding Republican and Democratic politicians, that they will go to great lengths to garner power to themselves because they believe that they're in a good position to make decisions for you and decisions for other governments around the world. This bothers me a great deal. On the upside, you asked me to say something nice about them. I think it is true that they want what's best for Americans. I think that they are typically, I wouldn't say this in every single case, but typically they are patriots who would probably make deep personal sacrifices to advance the interests of their constituents. I believe in most cases this is absolutely true. The problem is that they don't know how to do that. They don't know that the sacrifice that we need is for them to give up power. The sacrifice that we need is for them to be more trusting of the American electorate.
Yeah, that is really well said. I appreciate really everything that you've said today, and how you've kind of given us an inside view into your heart, your mind, Libertarian Party. How can people get more information about the Chase Ter Maat, or Ter Maat rather, campaign, and how can they connect with what you guys are doing to ensure you get as many votes as you can this upcoming fall?
I appreciate that. Well, the two basic ways you can get involved, we always need more volunteer workers to help get the message out. There is a lot to do. politics is all about connecting on an individual level, and we need all the help, the work help that we can get. The second way, of course, is that we need money. We are not one of those campaigns that's awash in cash, right? This is a campaign that needs the coin to do the blocking and tackling. You know, the next dollar that comes into our campaign finances Chase or me to be on the road, to get the message out, to reach the media. It does not go to, another dopey ad attacking a Republican or a Democrat. And so I would encourage people to consider making a donation. The ways that people can get in touch with us, we have a couple of basic websites. You can go to MikeTerMaat.com, which is tricky to spell because there's 2 A's in Ter Maat. You can go to VoteChaseOliver.com. That might be easier to spell, VoteChaseOliver.com or MikeTerMaat.com. By the way, you can check out a platform that I've been pushing for a couple of years now at goldnewdeal.org, because I believe that we need a fundamentally different relationship between us and government. You can read that at goldnewdeal.org, which is a lot of fun. We're obviously poking a little bit of fun at the New Deal under FDR, calling it a Gold New Deal. And one more thing I should plug that's a fun toy and a fun tool that I think your constituents might enjoy, and that is Lisa, the AI bot that answers questions in a libertarian fashion. And you can find that at libertarianintelligence.org. If you go to libertarianintelligence.org, you'll see an AI bot. You can ask Lisa all kinds of crazy questions and rational, good questions, down-to-earth questions, and you'll get a libertarian answer. And that can be a very useful tool, and it can be a fun toy at the same time.
Well, that's great. Thank you so much, Mike, for being on the program with us today. It's been a real pleasure having you.
Yeah, really. Mm-hmm.
It's been absolutely my pleasure, and thanks for being patient. Here in Virginia, we've had storms lately. Our connectivity is not very good. I know that there's been a bit of a delay, and you guys have been technologically patient, and I'm very grateful for that.
Yeah, absolutely. We're grateful for you and for your time. And to our viewers and listeners, thank you so much for joining. This has been Mike Ter Maat. He is the Vice President of the Libertarian. He's the Libertarian Party's nominee for Vice President for this year's election. I want you guys to make sure you get out there and vote. We'll put all the links in the show notes so you can check it out. And until next time, keep your conversations not right or left, but up. Take care.